Paul Craig Roberts is a best-selling author, former editor at the Wall Street Journal. He has a new great website they've launched, paulcraigroberts.org. He was the head of policy at Treasury, #2 position under Ronald Reagan, and is the father of Reaganomics, and he's recognized as one of the top 10 economists out there. We won't go over all of his laurels and international awards and national awards he's gotten, but he joins us briefly for the rest of the hour to break down all the incredible things that are happening. The Iran buildup, the NDAA, the police state, the Obama power grabs with recess appointments. What's number one on your radar screen right now, Dr. Roberts?
Well, Alex, you know, it's the murder, the public murder of the United States Constitution in full public view by both parties in Congress, both houses, and by the president. And this is an amazing thing. When they publicly repeal the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in a piece of legislation that has no justification whatsoever. You know, you could understand something like that, Alex, if every day a half a dozen shopping malls were blowing up, if people standing in the airports waiting to clear airport security, if bombs were going off in the lines, if terrorists were running in and spraying the crowd with automatic weapons, you know, if the neocons were being assassinated in their homes, if all of this was happening, one could understand these kinds of really desperate measures. But when nothing whatsoever is happening, despite the fact the United States has been bombing and murdering Muslims in 6 or more countries for the last 10 years, there hasn't been a single domestic act of terrorism in the United States since 9/11, and you and I know what we think about that event. So the whole thing, you see, has no justification, and people just sit there, and they've accepted the public murder of the United States Constitution. And what does this mean? You know, the Constitution is the result of about 800 years of struggle. We inherited it from the British. You know, the Bill of Rights, this was something they achieved over a long period of time of struggle. We inherited it. We enshrined it in the Constitution so that there would be limits on the government, and so the government would be accountable to law and could not just arbitrarily do things to people. Well, we've just allowed them to destroy this. And there's no objection. Of all the candidates, all the visible candidates, you know, the Democrats and the Republicans, contending for the presidency, only Ron Paul has made an issue of this. What does this mean about us as a country? So if we're going to let them murder the Constitution, then sure, we're going to let the Department of Homeland Security feel us up when we go through airports, porno scanners, post armed guards at Social Security offices, stop cars and trucks on the nation's highways and search them without warrants. This is a police state. I don't even think Hitler had a police state this thoroughgoing, or one whose foundation has been so well prepared over the last 10 years. So that's what's on my mind. You know, who's doing anything about it other than the ACLU? Now, I know you talk about it, I talk about it, but we don't have any way of actually doing anything about it, and the people seem to be accepting it.
Well, obviously, throughout history, governments that massively erode liberties in the name of safety, it's always that corrupt government system that is the true ultimate threat, much more so than some foggy, staged, fake terror threat. But here's the $64 million question that I want your perspective on, Dr. Roberts. Why are they accelerating internet censorship and admitting it's censorship, even when the 80 inventors of the internet come out and say it's that, Chinese-style, communist, you know, selective kill switch? Why are they admitting torture, NDAA, wireless wiretapping, all of this? Why are they moving so quickly right now and so openly? What are they planning? What are they doing this ahead of?
Yes, that's a good question. Obviously, they want to shut us up and stop the only access we have to any real information. which is on the internet. So what are they planning? Well, they may be preparing for economic catastrophe. There's obviously not an economic recovery. There cannot be an economic recovery when you've moved the entire manufacturing sector offshore, along with so many of the middle-class professional skill jobs. So they've run out of the ability to keep the economy going with consumer debt. So there's no recovery. What does that mean for the deficit? It's going to be bigger. The unemployment is going to be worse. There's going to be more protests, more hardship. So, and the financial situation has not been fixed. And so the deteriorating economy will renew all the pressures on the financial system. So they're worried about all that. They obviously are planning more wars. They've got Syria in their sights. They've got Iran in their sights. Even China. They now talk about their war plans for China. So they're preparing big things for us. Economic collapse at home, more wars abroad. And they want to be sure that we simply can't use the internet and the various kinds of social information networks to get information or to oppose these developments.
That's right, Doctor. You just put your finger directly on it. That's why, and I'm not a fan of the Communist Chinese, but the point is, their president came out, as you know, a month ago and said, we're preparing for war with the U.S. It looks like they're going to try to encircle us. The bases are being set up, so prepare for war with the United States. The Russians, who've not had an aggressive posture, are now having to say, okay, they're getting ready for war with us. Get ready.
It's going to be hard for the Russians to do that because they have foolishly allowed these non-governmental organizations that are funded by the American Endowment for Democracy to come in and muck around in the elections and organize street protests. And the Russians now are being seduced with membership in the World Trade Organization, so that we are I don't mean you and I, but so that Washington or whoever is pulling all the strings, so that they now have access to Russian leaders that they can purchase with money. That's the way the United States controls the world. It buys the leaders of all the other governments. Now, it's unable to do that in China and in Iran, but everywhere else it seems to have access and basically just purchases the leadership of those countries. And so that the leaders of those countries no longer represent their own country, their own people. They represent Washington's interest. I mean, why else is NATO fighting American wars in Central Asia or North Africa? There's nothing to do with NATO.
Well, they want part of that $500 billion in opium coming out of Afghanistan a year. But looking at this, now openly having the aircraft carriers, Strait of Hormuz, Iran threatening, don't bring your carriers back, U.S. troops arriving in Israel for what Israel calls a deployment, not a drill. Just crazy, crazy things happening. And I think you also hit the nail on the head again when you pointed out whoever's pulling the strings. This is not America. This is not our government. This is this global corporate consortium that controls the United States just like it controls others. And so what is the end game? I mean, as an economist with what's happening in Europe, the acceleration of currency devaluations, I mean, if you were to step into their shoes, their mindset, what do you think their method to their madness is?
Well, you see, the European banks were ruined by Wall Street, all the junk securities that Wall Street sold them under false pretenses. So that damaged them. And then they now, on top of that, they have this sovereign debt crisis, you know, the Greek debt, the Italian debt. And what Washington is doing, or whoever's pulling the strings, is using the hype of the European sovereign debt crisis to strengthen the dollar, to drive down the euro and drive down gold and silver and strengthen the dollar so that they can pull off this next big war front that they've got planned. So, and the reason they're putting American troops in Israel is that if they give Israel the green light to attack Iran, and Iran retaliates, the retaliation will probably hit some of the American troops who have been stationed around Israel, and then that gives Washington a reason to join in the war.
I was about to say, I have the reporter, they're peppering them at all of the main bases the Iranians are sure to hit.
Yeah, right. So Washington can say, oh, they killed our soldiers, and be off to war. So I think that all of that is what's in the cards, and people will sit without good information, unless the whole country watches you, a few other places. They'll sit without good information and be sucked into another hoax. And it's getting more and more dangerous because I think the Chinese and the Russians didn't get too disturbed about Iraq and Afghanistan. They may have seen it as a way of letting the Americans get themselves into a mess and bankrupt the government's budget and so on. But it's now getting closer and closer to them. You see, as we've talked before, the overthrow of Gaddafi, the war against Libya, this was directed at the Chinese oil investments in eastern Libya. The setup of Syria is directed at the Russian naval base in Syria. And if they hit Iran, as it certainly seems they intend to do with all of their rhetoric, this also threatens the Chinese investments in Iran, and it is too close to Russia's borders. So they're now really risking some kind of a nuclear encounter here with two powers, either one of which can blow away the whole world. So,
and by the way, with the Georgia conflict, as you know, sir, on 888, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it was on European TV, but not here, top story in Europe, rolled up mobile missiles and said on TV, well, okay, we're going to have to attack you with medium-range missiles because NATO aircraft were landing to back it up. And I mean, what other response do you do? And it turned out, Cy Hirsch discovered Dick Cheney was probing Russia. I mean, these are just crazy people that get off on this stuff. They already run the whole stinking world. Why do they have to just keep grabbing and grabbing and grabbing?
You know, they've been mad ever since the Joint Chiefs couldn't get John F. Kennedy in the early 60s to do a preemptive nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. The Joint Chiefs and the CIA had worked out that the Russians would not have the wherewithal to respond, but that they were quickly gaining, and that we needed to strike right away to negate Soviet power. And Kennedy nixed it. And they've been angry ever since. And they got more and more angry about the Vietnam War, about losing the Vietnam War.
Tell you what, Doctor, one more segment. Let's finish up there and look at the economy, the outlook there. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and he's launched a new website, and it's a really nice one. We'll give you that address right now. And when we come back, excited to see his work proliferating out there, paulcraigroberts.org. Our sites are Infowars.com. Don't forget the network site, GCNlive.com. We'll be right back.